Welcome, everyone. Can I call this meeting to order? Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, and as our executive assistant, Bonnie Ryder, will swear our commissioners-elect. Oh, sorry, Monica, I forgot. No, go right ahead.
We're going to do the universal greeting. We offer you peace.
We offer you peace.
We offer you friendship.
We offer you friendship.
We offer you love.
We offer you love.
We hear your needs.
We hear your needs.
We see your beauty.
We see your beauty.
We feel your feelings.
We feel your feelings.
We are all smart in our own way.
We're all
Smart in our own way.
We honor that in you.
We
Honor that in you.
Let us work together.
Let us work together. Welcome. And now our executive assistant, Bonnie Ryder, will swear in our commissioners-elects.
I have Article 48, Section 137 in the Charter of the City of Burlington states, all officers of the city shall, before assuming office, take, subscribe, and file with the city clerk the oath that is presented in front of you. I put the pieces of paper under the 4 people that are being sworn in. Do you all have them? Okay. Please wait to contribute your signature until I notarize your oath. I will begin with attendance via roll call. When I state your name, please respond with present. Then we will recite the oath together. At the time of recital, you will choose to either repeat, "So help me God," or "under the pains and penalties of perjury." I would like to establish attendance for Kathy Olwell,
Present.
Kendra Sowers,
Present.
Jeannie Waltz, present, Jeff Wick.
Present.
I would like to confirm that all re-elected and newly elected board members are present. We will now begin by reciting the oath. Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I your name,
Kathy Alwell,
do hereby affirm
Do hereby affirm
that I will faithfully discharge my duties
that I will faithfully discharge my duties
as a City of Burlington, Vermont School District School Board Commissioner
as the City of Burlington, Vermont School Board Commissioner.
School District School Board
as a City of Burlington, Vermont
As the City of Burlington, Vermont
School District School Board Commissioner
School
District School Board Commissioner
to the best of my knowledge and ability,
to the best of my knowledge and ability,
in accordance with the law,
in accordance with the law.
and here you choose, under the pains and penalties of perjury, or so help me God.
So help
The
me
pains
God.
and penalty of perjury.
Okay. Now I'll go around, you sign, I'll pick up the paper, stamp them, and scan them.
Can we have the 4 come together and get a picture with Russ? That'd be great. Clear? Where do you want them, Russ? Quick photo?
Sure. Kathy?
No, just the 4.
What did he want? Oh, photo.
Kendra.
Joining the gang.
I don't know who that is.
Okay, his first order of business is to nominate the board chair. May I have a nomination for a board chair?
I would like to nominate Claire Wolf. And I'd like to second that.
Good. So, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Nomination carries. Welcome, Chair Wolf.
Thank you very much. The second order of business is to elect a vice chair. May I have a nomination for the board vice chair?
I would like to nominate Jeff Wick.
May I have a second?
Second.
Stephen Carey. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. Welcome, Jeff Wick, as vice chair. Our final board officer nomination is for board clerk. May I have a nomination for board clerk?
I move that Michael Fisher become board clerk.
Any second? Thank you, Commissioner Waltz. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Welcome, board clerk Mike Fisher. Does anyone have any changes they would like to make to the agenda? Okay. May I have a motion to approve the agenda? Commissioner Alwell, thank you.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor of adopting the agenda?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion carries. Thank you. Next on the agenda is public comment. Commissioner Fisher, will you bring forth the public comment sign-in sheet?
It's still going around. We'll call. First up is Robert
Appel?
Appel. And so we're asking we have 2 to 3 minutes per person, please. On deck is Kia Morris.
Hi, welcome, Robert.
Thank you. I have statements to be read from both Kaya Morris and Tabitha Paul Moore, who is the president of the NAACP chapter in Rutland. Kaya is a former legislator who is an African-American woman, as is Tabitha. I've been helping Kaya since she's been a victim of online harassment, which required her to step away from her position as an elected representative in the House. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Robert Appel. I am an attorney in private practice here in Burlington. Some of you may know me from my days gone by, including former chair Pillsbury. I formerly served for 12 years as director of the Human Rights Commission. My practice is primarily civil rights and employment discrimination. I must say, and I've spoken to the board in the past around the racism that is obviously apparent in this district, which is quite disappointing. Here we are 10 or 12 years later, and we're having the same conversation. And I'm looking around the commissioners, and it's obvious to me that it's not representative of the community that you're trying to serve. It's an all-white board. So, I know the time is limited. Let me just jump into, let me start with Kaya's statement. I read to you today, this is in partial, trying to cut it so I don't go over our time. You'll get this full statement. I write to you today to express concern over recent reports of potentially discriminatory hiring practices by the Burlington School Board. Specifically, this letter regards the board's most recent decision to reject recommended hires for principal at schools in the district. Both candidates are persons of color. It is my understanding that the board made an intentional decision to reject the superintendent and selection committee's recommended candidates without justification. This most recent report is but one of several instances I am privy to over the past year regarding disparate and concerning treatment of teachers, administrators, and staff of color within the Burlington School District. And just to be clear, it's my understanding that the two applicants who were rejected are presently employees of the district, have performed well, and they're African American and are present in the room, that being Noel Green, who is serving as the interim principal at this school, and LaShawn Sells, who is principal at Sustainability Academy and apparently applied to be principal at Flynn. I also want to point out, and I'm sure you're aware of this, about 1 in 3 students in this district is a student of color. Okay, now I'm back to Kaya's statement. As a civil rights, racial justice, and educational reform advocate, I find it important to remind the board that one of the most straightforward lines to creating meaningful ethnic and social equity in our schools is through direct representation. The data is clear. When children and youth have teachers, staff, and administrators that reflect their own identities, educational outcomes, college acceptance rates, and hazing, harassment, and bullying rates are all positively affected. Youth of color look to see reflections of themselves in positions of power, influence, and leadership in the communities in which they reside. The school community is but one such community, and in many ways one of the most pivotal to their futures. In a 2012 paper, I'm going to omit their authors' names, entitled Race and the Principal Pipeline, the Prevalence of Minority Principals in Light of a Largely White Teacher Workforce, which of course is the case in this district. The authors spoke extensively about the need for representational leadership to improve outcomes for marginalized youth. This impact goes beyond mentorship, as youth will also observe the obstacles and opportunities afforded to teachers and administrators of color. According to the 17 Youth Risk Behavior Survey, only 55% of minority students in this district, quote, feel they matter to their community, close quote. For white students, the rate is significantly higher at 80%, a full 8% higher than even the state average in the same category. This speaks to a disconnect in perceived and actualized equality in school environments. Consider that each promotion or declination of a professional placement sends a clear message to youth around where their presence is valued, whose life matters most, and their personal potential within the school community. Samora Da Vinci is a recent graduate from Hardwick Union. I'm not sure if it's Hazen or Harwood Union, but a recent high school graduate and a trainer in issues on diversity, equity, and inclusion. She said this about her educational experience as a youth of color in Vermont. Quote, "While it is most important for me to bring up is about internalized oppression and how that develops. As a child of color, I grew up never learning anything about myself. I didn't see a face that looked like my own. Dr. King and Rosa Parks does not meet the bare minimum. The way we learn about oppression of people of color is very victim blaming and derogatory. I feel that maybe if I had been given the opportunity to learn about the experiences of people of color and not just the negative experiences, we have a plethora of experiences that are valuable and have changed the world. That maybe I would have viewed myself differently and not had to undergo this phase of self-loathing. This representation extends beyond curriculum into the very fabric of the school culture and environment. Through her work, Kaya learned that all Vermont schools struggle to recruit and retain educational professionals of color. Hiring highly qualified candidates of color helps to reverse that trend. It sends a clear message to the broader education sector that while far from perfect, the Burlington School District is committed and actively seeking to foster meaningful diversity, equity, and inclusion. It shows a readiness to change and dismantle systemic racism and inequality in the places where you each hold power.
Excuse me, you're at 6 minutes.
I will switch and you'll get a printed copy of that. Now I'd like to read Ms. Moore's, Paul Moore's statement. I appreciate you taking time to listen to the voices and concerns of the citizens here tonight. I'm glad that you value the input and wishes of those you serve. What seems antithetical to this position, though, is your decision not to listen to the recommendations provided to you by the hiring committee that this behavior alone is baffling at best and raises questions about your understanding of the role of a hiring committee, as well as the aforementioned commitment to listening to and heeding the voices of those in your community. Why would you ask them to hire a superintendent if you did not intend to follow through with their recommendation? Normally, it's superintendent's prerogative. I'm sure you're aware of the data in Vermont in relation to finding competent educational leaders who want to take on the task of being a principal. You were presented with two. You chose neither. As I said, this alone is concerning to anyone with basic knowledge about how the hiring process works. Not only were you provided the two nominees that were unanimously agreed upon by your own hiring committee, but they were both people from marginalized racial groups, and you turned both of them down. Are you even aware what this looks like? Hopefully you are now, as I and other members of the justice groups in the larger community come together tonight to challenge your hasty dismissal of qualified candidates of color. It is no secret to anyone in Vermont, it is no secret to anyone that Vermont has a problem with race. It doesn't look like hoods and torches or nooses. It looks like rejected candidates in denial of bias. It looks like rationalizing behavior rather than introspecting about how decisions are made. It looks like going against every possible form of best practice without cause. It looks, quite frankly, just like what you were doing. The Rutland Area NAACP stands with the Burlington City Schools community in their call for accountability for this behavior. We will support you. We will support them in all their endeavors for justice and hope that you follow their lead and heed the voices of your community. I'm sure you'll be hearing other testimony from other witnesses this evening in accord with this statement. I understand my time is about up. I will submit my comments in writing as well. Thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening.
Thank you.
Jane Odell. On deck is Sherwood Smith.
Welcome, Jane.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to the newly sworn in members of the school board, and to Chair Bull and Vice Chair Wick. I am now a citizen. I was formerly on City Council, and I teach economics at the University of Vermont. The school board has recently rejected two of the superintendent's choices for principal positions, choices that were arrived at using, as I understand it, a new process that was designed by the board. In both cases, the individual whose appointment was rejected is a person of color who is currently employed by the Burlington School Department, and we are now at risk of losing them, of not retaining them within the city employment. And I have to wonder whether this is really the desired outcome. I can't imagine that it is. But is the board's action consistent with the City of Burlington's diversity and equity plan, which calls for each department of the city, and I understand that to include the school department, to, quote, develop strategies to address underutilization and demonstrate commitment to equal employment opportunity and non-discrimination policies. So my question is, you know, we in the city expect all departments to pursue affirmative hiring that will lead to a diversified leadership team. And I have another area of concern just around governance and the role of the board, and I wonder to myself, how can the superintendent do his job if he does not have the latitude to build his team? And I wonder, as do other members of the community, why we are now seeing this level of micromanagement by the school board. And just as a citizen, I urge the board to keep your eye on big picture issues, to let the superintendent build his team, and then evaluate him, or in the future possibly her, on the results, including results in the area of diversity and inclusion. So to conclude, I would just observe that up until now, the school department has actually done a much better job than the city side of local government in bringing people of color into administrative leadership. And in my years, my recent 6 years on the council was never presented with a department head of color to affirm. and where there is currently no person of color in administrative leadership on the city side. And so I commend the department for its successes up until now. I believe it is a vital aspect of breaking down racial stereotypes and creating a more equitable and open city. And I am concerned that your leadership in this regard is at risk with these recent decisions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Sherwood Smith, on deck, infinite question.
Hi, welcome, Sherwood.
Thank you very much. Sherwood Smith, I'm a resident of Burlington since 1995 and a parent, student in the school district. I'm going to try to use my watch to keep me on time for you. So first, I want to thank both the new and the current board members. This is not my first time here, and I've seen many of you be here till 11 o'clock at night trying to get input from the community. So I appreciate the job you do in spite of the unbelievable wages and short hours. So thank you for the time, effort, and commitments you make. I also want to acknowledge that this is always an odd process since it's monologue and rarely dialogue, and that there's not any easy way to actually get a conversation going. That said, I'm going to try to get through this in my allotted time. So I'm going to just present some data. I think my concerns have aptly been stated by Appel and Odell, both in terms of the board's process or perhaps ignorance of process in terms of selection and concerns in terms of representation. So the school district in the 2016 data has 31 plus languages spoken. I would love to know how many languages are spoken among the board members and how many of those languages are represented among the teaching and administrative staff at the school. Burlington, unlike the rest of Vermont, is really listed as only about 93% Caucasian or Anglo. Looking at the board, I don't see that representation in the board in terms of the Burlington community. The school teachers, according to your own data from the 2014 report, is 96% white. How does that represent the community? Let's talk about disability. Let's talk about language fluency. Let's talk about cultural competency. It's interesting that the high school had a 6% rate in terms of training, according to that report, compared to other schools, which had 40% in terms of the diversity training. I'd be interested to know what those numbers are like now and how the board's own training has gone in reference to those issues. So the school numbers are actually better. It used to be 97% in terms of the white teaching force. In terms of the district student body, according to the data from the school district's own online report, is only 85% Caucasian. So again, roughly 35% of the students are not represented or not seeing themselves. And let's turn this around. What is an acceptable percentage of white faculty and board members? Forget how many diverse members you should have. Is there an acceptable number? Is it 95, 98, 99, 100? Is that okay?
3 minutes.
I have 6 seconds left, I think. The last things I want to ask is, in terms of what you're doing, what is the board's position on retention? What are their definitions of affirmation versus discouragement, reward versus punishment? How are you acknowledging the staff and faculty of color that you do have? And how are you engaging, you have the numbers in what I've given you, in terms of the parents in the community? If not on the board, I'd love to know how the board members are actually engaging with the diverse communities in this city, individually or as a group. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Infinite, and on deck, Aiden Haji.
Hi, welcome, Infinite.
Hi, folks. Again, I there's only one subcommittee meeting I haven't been to. That's the finance committee meeting. Been to every committee meeting that this board has had this year. And I would have to say that my concern is the proportion to which those meetings are public versus when those meetings are in executive session. And so I was thanked on the way in for, showing up and being engaged, but it is literally impossible for me to be engaged and participate in my school governance process when it's closed. So I don't know if I'm the only one tracking the minutes, and the hours, and the days that we don't get to talk through some of these issues that you're working on behind closed doors, but some of us would appreciate it if you'd open up a little bit. Thanks.
Thank you.
Aiden Haji, on deck, Brian Pine.
Welcome, Auden.
Thank you. My question and statement was actually said earlier about connecting more with community members and how that is being implemented out in the community, the work that the board is doing. And I'm really, I was concerned growing up with how we're reaching out to families that do speak different languages, that have like little to no idea what's going on in the school district. Even those that do speak English also have confusions on what's going on. And I am a Long Burlington resident, but also went through the Burlington School District. So I've seen some of the experiences that some of the youth are going through right now. And looking back, I feel like some of them could have been intervened with not just mentorship, but being able to connect with them through administrative levels as well. Not just leaving it to the teachers, but also inviting other community organizations into the schools and having the board be a part of that process. And I feel like the language barrier is a huge concern in the city or overall. And I just wanted to see what type of ways that the boards are doing to include those families that English isn't their strongest language, but are concerned with their children's education and want to figure out how to get involved apart from the parent-teacher conferences, because those are only once or twice semester, and it doesn't really, some of them may not even provide translation. So how can we help to combat that? Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Pine, on deck, Marcella Green.
Hi, welcome, Brian.
Thank you. I really appreciate the board and to take these comments into consideration. I do it out of respect, and I really want you to feel that. There may be some stuff in here that doesn't sound happy, and it's not, but I think this topic's a difficult one, and as white people, I think it's really important for us to engage in this discussion in a way that is less defensive and has less heat and more light on the subject, so I hope I can contribute to that tonight. I remember when the Diversity and Equity Committee was formed and began implementing some of the recommendations from the Diversity and Equity Task Force, which included affirmative hiring practices to diversify the staff so that it more closely resembles our diverse student body. There was some resistance to these changes at many levels, but until this year, the school board stood firm and resolute that our community needed to take decisive action to address a seemingly intractable problem, not just in Burlington, not just in Vermont, but across this country. The district's focus on staff diversification in the past served as a model for the city. I've always looked to the school commissioners who were pioneers in this area as both an inspiration personally, as an example of what we in the city can do to make our public institutions more representative of the people that we are supposed to serve, that we are trusted to serve. It's troubling now to see this board reject 2 highly qualified candidates of color who were recommended by hiring committees through a legitimate hiring process. These administrators are incumbents in their respective schools. It is unclear to the public why a majority of this board chose this course of action, with no apparent rationale that's obvious to the rest of us. Your actions have called into question the direction of this district under your leadership. It's difficult to watch these events unfold when we as a city are seeking leadership on this issue, which requires a boldness and willingness to move outside of our personal comfort zones. We must constantly ask ourselves what we are doing as citizens, as leaders, as parents, as community members to make Burlington better for everyone. Underline everyone. I urge the school board to engage in a process of self-reflection to ensure that your hiring decisions going forward advance our shared goals of diversity, equity, and inclusion at all levels of local government. I believe we can do better, and I think we must do better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Marcella Gange, up on deck, Stephanie Seguino.
Hi, welcome, Marcella.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Marcella Gange. I'm a parent in the school district. First of all, I want to thank you all for your service on the school board. I've spoken before the board on previous occasions in support of our district equity goals and the important work underway to close opportunity gaps faced by various of our students in the district. I echo the sentiments of previous speakers and the concern at the recent overriding of hiring processes. These processes were apparently approved by the board and then overridden by the board, with the subsequent denial of permanent principal positions to candidates of colour. I'm very concerned about both the transparency and equity impacts of these decisions. I encourage the board to consider that concern over this overriding of the hiring process and the perceptions of potential discrimination risks undermining school leadership and losing other highly qualified and competent staff that are currently working in our district. Thank you.
Stephanie Seguino, on deck, Kyle Dodson.
Hi, welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you all for hearing us, and I want to echo Brian Pine's comments that this is a hard discussion, and I hope you will take them in the spirit that this is meant. And I would ask for your indulgence for a little bit extra time. I think this topic is too important to rush, and I don't think it lends itself to sound bites. So if you wouldn't mind accommodating me, I'd really appreciate it. The people that have spoken here tonight, parents, public officials, and community members, share a common value with the broader community, and that is a commitment to the goal of racial equality and an opposition to racial and class bias and discrimination in our city. We're here tonight because this board's recent employment decisions and other actions towards staff of color have taken our community backwards to a place we do not want to be, one where people of color are mistreated, are held to a different standard than white employees, and are denigrated in our district. Although we can't measure internal motivations, the evidence of this is apparent in the pattern that has emerged from recent board actions of pursuing negative employment actions and criticism exclusively of staff of color. The pattern of bias and discrimination is stark, and the message you as an all-white board are sending in is clear, that staff of color are undeserving of jobs in our school district. I'm speaking to you in a straightforward manner, but I want to acknowledge that this is a hard discussion. Robin DiAngelo recently wrote a book, and I encourage you to have a look at it, called White Fragility. And in that book, she underscores that white people have little experience talking about race, and so when faced with this discussion, they often respond with psychological defense mechanisms such as anger, fear, guilt, denial, and silence. The unfortunate result is that the discussion then often moves to white people's discomfort rather than the experiences of people of color who are damaged by biased attitudes. I would encourage you to set aside your own personal reactions right now if you can, and to consider the impact on those who have been unfairly harmed by your decisions. I'm going to comment primarily about Noel Green and LaShawn Whittemore Sells, but others have been affected by the ongoing bias of members of the board and it is fair to say that many staff of color in the district now feel that they must get a lawyer in order to protect themselves from this board's actions. Before speaking about that, it's useful to remind you all of what this district was like just a few years ago for EL students, students of color, and low-income students of all races. At the high school in particular, but in other schools as well, these kids faced excessive out-of-school suspensions, a lack of attention to their needs, and a systemic failure to understand their life circumstances. The guidance department at the high school in particular failed these kids, with numerous cases of EL students graduating, believing they had the coursework to attend college, only to find that they did not, due to the lack of support from the guidance department.
3 minutes.
A past principal and 2 past assistant principals were known at the high school for bullying and targeting kids of color in particular. These administrators did not seek to develop relationships with kids. Rather, kids of color and low incomes kids were disproportionately denied educational services by being suspended for the most minor of infractions, such as skipping a class, even as white kids who engaged in the same behavior did not face suspension. The arrival of Noel Green at the high school moved us away from this discriminatory environment. Noel has been an effective school leader, improving outcomes of those that had been left behind in the past. Among other noteworthy achievements, Noel has supported the reduction of suspensions and the implementation of restorative practices. It has been said, though we do not know, that a reason that the board voted against Noel Green's appointment is due to a complaint from an EL teacher about tardiness amongst EL students. The suggestion that Noel might not be right for the job because of this is contradicted by the district's own data, which shows that EL students actually have a lower absentee rate than other students, not higher. With regard to LaShawn Sells, apart from the legal problems the board has created for itself and the district by overriding the decision to grant her request to transfer to Flynn, it should be known that LaShawn had previously been at Flynn. When she was appointed as principal to the Sustainability Academy a few years ago, she was the only principal at the time who faced resistance from white parents about her appointment. At least one board member currently made a comment to a city councilor that LaShawn was not a good fit for Flynn School. And there is a suggestion in that, a belief that a school with a higher percentage of white kids should have only a white principal. White students also benefit from seeing people of color in leadership positions. It helps them learn that the racial hierarchy we see in other parts of society are not the way things should be. LaShawn has thus endured several rounds of discriminatory treatment in this district, and her experience speaks to why it is difficult to retain staff of color because of our district's reputation for mistreating people of color.
5 minutes.
Thanks. In rejecting the hiring recommendations of the board, of the superintendent, the board is violating its own policies and is implicitly inferring it does not trust the superintendent's educational and administrative expertise, thus undermining his role. This is a common feature of racial discrimination, whereby people of color's authority is undercut as compared to white males who are seen as more trustworthy and deserving of positions of authority, and thus whose decisions are much less likely to be questioned. I know of only one hiring decision in the past in which an assistant principal was not promoted based on the superintendent's recommendation. This was several years ago and was in part due to widespread reports that this person's bullying and mistreatment of students of color and low-income students, including EL students, made him incompetent for that position. There was, in other words, an identifiable reason not to hire this person. I realize that I'm taking a long time, and I want to just briefly summarize some research on race and implicit bias, which I think is the issue that is at the heart of your recent decisions. And I'm sorry, my mouth is dry. First of all, we all have implicit bias to some degree because we live in a culture that promotes negative stereotypes of people of color and unrealistically positive stereotypes about the skills and morals of white people. Thus, when it is said that the board has engaged in racial bias in its treatment of staff of color in the school district, this is not to say that you are bad people or intentionally discriminating against people of color. Good people hold these stereotypes because of the culture we live in. Our collective job is to become aware of them and to override them so that we treat people fairly and support the educational needs of kids in our district. The data are incontrovertible on racial bias, and in which we devalue the qualifications of people of color and elevate those of sometimes undeserving whites, which runs rampant in our society. In a number of employment studies, for example, employers were asked to evaluate resumes with black and white sounding names. The authors found that applicants with white sounding names were 50% more likely to receive a callback than those with black sounding names, even though they had the same qualifications. Perhaps more disturbing, one study found that whites with a criminal record were more likely to be called back for an interview than blacks without a criminal record. This shows us how deep the bias is and how important it is for all of us to be vigilant. We here in Vermont are no different than the rest of the country. Racial bias shows up in policing, it shows up in disparate sentencing, in criminal justice, and in the treatment of pre-K children, as well as therapists' willingness to call back patients, potential clients who have white or black sounding voices. It shows up in the doctor's office, in which African American patients are less likely to be prescribed pain medication than whites and less likely to be recommended for medical tests than whites. Here are some of the biases that show up routinely. People of color are ranked as less intelligent, even when they have the same educational background as whites. White people report being more suspicious of people of color, feeling less trust of them and the decision-making, and thus being less likely to recommend blacks for supervisory positions than similarly qualified whites. There are often statements in hiring meetings in which the committee is all white that candidates of color may not be a good fit unless they are supervising only people of color. Committees, especially those that are all white, have been found to overemphasize any perceived deficits of candidates of color, even while they overlook deficits of white applicants. Numerous studies find, for example, that African American job applicants are held to stricter standards of competence than white applicants. In one study, participants required African Americans to show them as to show greater evidence of leadership skills than whites before rating them as capable of excelling in the position to which they were applying. In another study, authors found that the achievements of black managers were less likely to be attributed to ability or effort and more likely to be attributed to help from others than were the achievements of others. In short, there is a widespread racial prejudice in this country and in our state, and clearly in our school district as well. I believe that many of you want to be part of the solution here in Burlington to create a racially egalitarian city in which the lives of all children matter. In that vein, we all urge you to revisit your decisions about the principal positions of Flynn and BHS, to approve the superintendent's and hiring committee's recommendations, and to secure the services of implicit bias trainers to help you reflect on your values, your stereotypes, and assumptions you brought to the table in your previous discussions so that you can identify your own biases. I want to end this very long monologue on a positive note, and that is that I believe that most of you on this board do not want to engage in racial bias. Implicit biases can be overcome, and we as a community support you in doing the right thing by our children, our broader community, and the staff of color in the school district. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
Ali? Oh, I'm sorry. Kyle Dodson was next. Sorry, Ali, you're on deck.
I presume that wasn't purposeful. Won't take it personally.
Hi, welcome, Kyle.
Hey, what's up, Claire? Hey, everybody. I want to begin by echoing my fellow citizens' comments about respect and appreciation for what you guys do. As many of you may know, I was once in your seat, and I'm not unhappy to be on this side of the table, for the record. And I hope that people, I like the comment about the lack of opportunity for dialogue. Maybe in the future, we as a community can think about that. I think that does the people on the board a disservice, and it does our ability to grow as a community a disservice, that this is a monologue generally. I liked Brian Pine's comments about heat and light. I think that we all can learn how to critically engage one another in a respectful way, in a way that says we gotta move forward together. After tonight, we'll still be in the same community. We'll still have all our kids to care for, and so I hope you know that that's the spirit in which I offer my comments. Really, I want to start generically. I think I don't always have a chance to talk to all of you. I love this community. I've raised 3 boys here. It's been very good to me. But one of my concerns is I think we're smug. I think we're too invested in our innocence. I think we suffer from exceptionalism. I think many of us say that's true except for us. Chicago, Ferguson, Boston, wherever in America problems are happening, we're no different. We live in the same context. Our country was founded on racist premises, and we suffer from the residue and the legacy of that reality, period. And I don't think we acknowledge that as much as other places, quite frankly. And I think it stunts our growth. We're an incredible place. We could be better once we start learning how to confront the reality of living in context better than we currently do. You know, from that, I guess I really have some questions as I observe what's going on about perhaps curious attention in some directions and not attention in others. I'm not close to it, but from what I understand, and maybe the facts are wrong, but I understand that Noel and LaShawn did go through a process. My experience of being on hiring committees is that when you put forward finalists, you only should do so if all those people could do the job. That everyone I've been on, anyone you're saying that of these people, one of them can do the job, and we're going to have a process to see which one of them, but they're all competent and viable. So when it comes down to one, it should be a done deal because they should have been vetted previously as not being worthy of being finalists if that's the case. But once they are finalists, then that is saying that somebody in this group, 2, 3, 4, wherever we land, that we are as a committee and as a group saying we're comfortable with this person. So once again, that's been my experience. So it raises questions for me. What went down that made it not go that way? Maybe the board has a different understanding of how that process works, but that's one thing that I understand. And it sounds, once again, I have not been made privy to any significant and deeply concerning issues around LaShawn's candidacy. And I do think it's a prerogative, and I was on the board that did overrule what some administrators had thought, but I thought the evidence was overwhelming.
3 minutes.
That was, thank you, Jeff, was overwhelming to point to the idea that was a good decision. And once again, you know, it is the prerogative of the board, but I have not seen nor been made aware of the things that would cause us to, you know, intervene in this way. And I think, you know, my colleagues here in the community did raise some important things. We are in a tough spot. It's a very difficult place, Burlington, for a number of reasons, to attract candidates, to attract a diverse group of professionals. And what we do matters. If people leave and they feel like they aren't treated well and they tell stories, we are going to have more difficulty recruiting people. People have choices. You know, Yao Bam, look, yeah, I'm going to name names. Yao has choices. Yao will leave here. He will make more money than he makes in Burlington. He will have an easier time of it. This is a tough district. We're one of the most diverse places in America because usually when the people of color move in, the white folks move out. That's our history. I didn't make that up. Just, you know, look in the books. And so we haven't had that. Thank goodness. We still got people on Summit Avenue who want to pay $1 million for a home, and they go to school with kids of color. That is not America's past. We have perhaps a little opportunity to do better than most of our fellow citizenry have done. But it takes hard work. It takes commitment. It takes sacrifice. It won't just happen. And we could miss this opportunity, and we could be down the road, and someone will say, Burlington used to be such a nice place to live. And none of us, most of us here won't suffer because we're insulated. And I'm with you. I'm not accepting myself. I'm insulated. The district has done well by the Dotson boys, but most of the things that are work for the Dotson boys were in place before they got to Burlington High School. There's privileges and historic things, and so I don't judge us on how we serve the Dotson boys. I judge us on how we serve the most vulnerable. And we've got some work to do there. So I came here just to share and to say, I hope that you're having internal conversation about this. I hope you'll lead us with humility. Say, this is our problem. I want you to lead this community and say, we live in a racist society, we live in a racist country, and we have to work hard. We have to overcome this residue, this legacy of our past. And we as a board are going to lead you in that. We're going to show you how we get there. We're going to stand on the edge. We're going to take chances. We're going to have people not like us, but we're going to do it because it's right by our kids. So I hope we do that. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Commissioner Ali.
Welcome, Ali.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me. And I just wanted to start by saying thank you to every single one of you for the work that you do. Because it is the hardest work in the city. Because the future of our children is under your hands. The future of next generation, you are driving it. The way you want to push it, it's that way it will move forward. I don't have a prepared statement, but I just wanted people to understand that I have been working for the district since I moved here in 2008. And I saw the district change over time, sometimes in a very good and positive way. When I was there, I was the only black person
But now all the offices next to us are occupied by people of color, which is incredible. But at the same time, wanting to specifically talk about this, my children are doing extremely great in Burlington schools, especially at the Sustainability Academy, because of the leadership of LaShawn. I think she will do an amazing job at Flint, because I worked at Flint, I witnessed her competence. She will do great, and I hope that you would consider making sure that she would lead that wonderful school. I don't know Noel Green, but all I heard about him, and also about the interview that I watched online, he's great. He's an incredible person, and if we have diversity as a goal, the people that we have the assets, we have to keep it. We should not let these wonderful people leave our district. If there are structural that you need to do in order to keep them both in leadership position, please explore it and do it. If Yao fails, you all fail. If you fail, we fail our parents. And I think you have a great and wonderful responsibility in making sure that the right folks we trained for years will stay in this wonderful district. Thank you for your time, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak at public comment?
Hi, welcome.
Hi, thanks. I'm Christine Wilmore. I actually graduated from BHS a very long time ago. And I am in a similar position with Kyle, that I have a son who graduated here and actually even had a learning disability and went on to graduate college. So the school did pretty well by him, and there's a lot of people here that I will continue to thank for their service. So saying all the positive things, I'd also just like to say that it's really concerning to even be talking about these kind of issues now. I mean, it's 2019. And I think that you guys all understand that you're public servants and you're accountable to the public. And we're all here, you know, I came from just a little while ago, you know, sometimes it's hard to show up here, but I just really want you to know that the people of color and other people that are in the room are connected to a lot of other people, and there are a lot of people that are watching what's going on. And I think that we should really be trying to find a way that this doesn't have to be so adversarial. And I think that you really have to hear what people are saying, and you have to figure out a way to not continue to operate this way. And we're gonna come back. And if I get a call to come back here, I'm gonna show up again, and I'm gonna bring other people. I don't wanna sound threatening, but that's evidently what we have to do. So thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to speak at public comment?
All right. Hi, welcome.
Good evening. My name is Maurice St. Louis. Some people call me Dr. St. Louis, but most people know me as Mo. I've worked to ensure for many years that our students have a chance to have the best education possible. And I often bring my students to, when LaShawn works at Flint Academy, I used to bring my students to volunteer there, and currently bring my students to volunteer at the Sustainable Academy. Because for me, the resources we have are limited, and part of what I've tried to do through the years is to bring resources to bear whenever I can to give our students a coherent fighting chance and to lessen the pressure on teachers. What I have been encouraged by for some years was a sustained effort by the board to address some systemic issues that students in the district was facing. And we've made considerable progress. That can really be assessed to by looking at our data and outcome for our students. I had been very engaged with students who graduated who could not write a sentence, who thought they were college prepared but were in fact not. And we worked really hard to create an environment where that did not happen. And part of how we did that was to use the members of the community and try to influence a process that is fair and equitable, and to try to create an environment where the lives of our students are considered and the outcome of their lives are considered. Because if our students fail, our community fails. Our revenue base fails. Our ability to support the community and the growing elder populations will be impacted. And so our ability to provide avenue for success for our students is not just about the lives of our students, it's about our lives and the health of our community. And finding competent leaders who understand the needs of the students has always been a challenge in our community. I often tell my students that if you can imagine it, you can have it. If you can imagine an inclusive community, you can have it.
3 minutes.
If you can imagine inclusive leadership, you can have it, because you can't make the effort to have it, and you won't have the commitment to have it. And what I hope this board, who seems to have a different orientation, who seems to be walking back some of the progress we have made through the years, what I hope this board will help us do as a community is imagine. To imagine a place where we really meet the needs of our students. To imagine a place where we respect the leaders of color and the folks who are sacrificing much to provide our students with the best outcome. And to make hard decisions that challenges or even our ability to imagine that world. And to look to the eyes of our students, and at the end of the day, what I hope you will do is to make decisions that reflect your values. And I really believe that you wanted to be elected to meet the needs of our students. I think these decisions runs contrary to that. And I hope you will reassess and help the community move in a way that honors the kind of value that we want in our community and the kind of support we wish for our students. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak at public comment?
All right. Seeing none, we will move on to board reflection. Does anyone have any board reflection? Commissioner Fisher.
So I'd like to speak to Mr. Smith, Mr. Haji, and Mr. Dodson talked about how, first of all, thank you to everybody for coming out. And thank you for speaking on behalf, advocating, and challenging the board. I think that leads to better outcomes. So in terms of community engagement, there's some questions that were asked about how the board is engaging the community. We've put forth significant effort to the point of creating a community engagement committee that meets monthly, including an opportunity every month at those committee meetings to have an open dialogue. As Mr. Dodson highlighted, this is not an opportunity to have a dialogue, public comment. So I encourage you, we will get the word out that to come to those committee meetings and have a true discussion and dialogue with board members.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Anyone else?
Oh, unless someone, is there someone over there? No?
Commissioner Wick?
Me. Yeah, good evening to the group, to the public. I just want to say I'm grateful. We've got I can't speak for the board, but I suspect I do. An incredibly impressive, inspiring, and important group of people speaking tonight, and I'm humbled by it, and I sincerely mean that, and I thank you, each and every one of you, for speaking up. It is so important, and I suspect that we do hear you, and I suspect I speak for the board in that I think we all should be, want to be on the same team and working for the same objectives. And I think what was said tonight was very, very important, and I truly am grateful. It's an incredibly impressive group of minds out there who've said some wonderful things. So I just wanted to make sure I said that. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Wick. Anyone else? All right. Thank you very much. Moving on, we will move to item 6, the VSBA presentation by Nicole Mace. Hi. Yeah, or right up by Bonnie.
Do not prefer to stand.
Yes.
Thank you.
Pass out
Sure.
Oh, Jeff's handing it out? Okay. You have it. You got it. You know what? We did that.
Are you mic'd up so we can all hear you?
I think so.
Wonderful.
Testing.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know whether either of you want to say a few words of introduction as to what brought me here tonight.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We are delighted and honored to have Nicole here, Executive Director of the Vermont School Boards Association. As the entire board knows, and Superintendent Obang, the board has retained Nicole and the Vermont School Boards Association to assist us with the superintendent's evaluation, which is required by contract each year. And the due date for our deliverable is May 31st. And the School Boards Association has a service which they offer to school boards, and we're grateful to have your expertise and knowledge as part of our team here. So thank you, and we'll pass it over to Nicole.
Great, thank you, Jeff. So as Jeff mentioned, one of the services that we offer to school districts is support through the superintendent evaluation process. Your contract with the superintendent, you can see the language listed on the first page of this handout that requires the board to conduct an evaluation on an annual basis. And we believe that that process is critical to establish a highly effective relationship between the board and the superintendent. So what I would like to do tonight is just share with you the process that I've had conversations with Claire, Jeff, and Mike about this process. We've also talked with Yao, and now it's your opportunity to learn about the process and hopefully take the next week to look it over and provide feedback to Jeff and Claire and Mike as we have a meeting to move forward with this next week. So the process that we use is one that uses a rubric that is designed to, that reflects best practice and is aligned with the professional standards for administrators. The reason that we use a rubric is because we believe it defines very clearly what effective performance looks like versus ineffective performance. Many times school board members don't have direct knowledge or appreciation for the breadth and depth of the responsibilities of superintendent. And so if you rely on an evaluation tool that asks for an evaluation of someone's performance as being effective or ineffective without clear examples about what effective performance looks like that are grounded in research and best practice, it's sort of all in the eye of the beholder. And it's actually an area where bias can creep in and or just simply not understanding truly what are the expectations. So we have adapted this tool from a tool that was developed in New York State. It's been refined throughout the course of, we've now conducted, I believe, 7 superintendent evaluations in the last year or so using this rubric, and it gets better every time. So it's not a done deal or set in stone, but we do want to encourage you to use it as the basis for your evaluation. So the rubric evaluates superintendent performance in the areas of board and superintendent relationship, policy, business and finance, community relations, faculty and staff relationships, and instructional leadership. It also includes or has the ability to include evaluation of specific goals that were articulated for the superintendent's performance. Now, your contract and your model of governing requires you to also incorporate the executive limitations monitoring reports that you have received as a board. So the conversation that we've had to date is that this process will really both incorporate the monitoring reports that the board has received along with the completion of this evaluation instrument. I think my understanding is that the board members themselves will be asked to complete the evaluation. Superintendent conducts a self-evaluation, and direct reports will also be included in the process. Once that happens, once everybody, so it's an online survey link, responses are anonymous, there's an opportunity to add comments after every domain area. So if you want to add further explanation or illustration for why you answered in a particular way, you can do that. We'll meet as a committee and with the superintendent to review the results of the board's responses, the results of the direct reports, and his own self-evaluation, have a discussion about themes, and arrive at a summative statement of performance that would then be included in the superintendent's personnel file and would hopefully culminate in some very clear goals articulated for the coming school year. So I don't know if you want to go through the rubric.
I think it would be helpful if, Nicole, you would briefly take us through it, high-level overview.
Sure.
And then maybe we opened it up to questions, because I suspect commissioners will have questions. I myself will have a couple of questions.
Sure. So if you turn to the first page in the rubric, and the rating box is a little misleading. Essentially, you'll get this online survey, and you'll be asked to select one of these 4 answers. You'll also have the opportunity to select, I don't have enough information. And actually when the commissioners or board members don't have enough information, and that's a pattern that you can start to see, that becomes a gray area for conversation around why don't we know about this, and whether it's in the area of instructional leadership or whether it's in the area of community relations. There's a lot that a superintendent does that boards just don't have direct knowledge of, perhaps because you haven't had time in a board meeting to talk about it, or it's not an area of emphasis for the district. But it's okay to not know. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That just creates an opportunity for discussion. So within board and superintendent relationship, you have the ability to provide feedback on the level of information that gets shared with the board, materials and background, board questions, whether they get answered, input and feedback, and board development. And again, each category, from effective through highly effective, has clear illustrations of what performance looks like in each of those categories. I believe, also operating results and interpersonal skills are within that category. In the area of policy, You're going to be asked to evaluate on policy execution, development and administration, procedure development and administration, policy maintenance, and dissemination. And this is an area I think that often helps to clarify areas where in some cases the board has some work to do. Where a superintendent may be carrying out a board policy that's dated. And so some board members don't like what's in that policy, and it sort of then becomes an opportunity to discuss, well, maybe we need to update the policy if we don't like what's happening in terms of implementation. Business and finance, we're going to look at budget development and maintenance, budget reports, budget education, facility management. Community relations looks at district advocacy, communication with the community, media relations, approachability, collaboration, and engagement, in addition to interpersonal skills and local and state agency relations. Operational management and leadership reflects performance in the areas of internal communications, personnel matters, supervision and evaluation, delegation of duties, interpersonal relations, recruitment, visibility, operational objectives, investigations and negotiations, and supervisory objectives. And again, these can be tweaked by the committee based on input from the board in terms of, well, that's not really how we talk about it, or that's not really, that doesn't cover an area that we've determined to be a priority for this board. Instructional leadership looks at professional knowledge, self-improvement, focus on students, goal development, staff development, curriculum, and implementing a continuous improvement plan. And then the last page is really where you would ask board members to rate performance in specific goal areas that were identified. And I think there's some question here about whether or not this board did set clear goals last time around. I've done it a lot of different ways. If there aren't clear goals that have been committed to writing and communicated, I recommend you don't evaluate somebody on that. But to the extent there were clear goals, this would be the opportunity to incorporate them. And then, as I said earlier, the hope being that this process will culminate with some very clear goals. We generally suggest no more than 5.
Chair Wool, I don't know if I may, if we want to go around, start with Commissioner Gordon. Commissioner Gordon. That's all.
Commissioner Gordon.
Commissioner Gorman. If you have any questions for Nicole, no. Next, Mark. Commissioner Gurlett. Sorry.
You mentioned that we will be speaking with you 3 about rubric. I think you mentioned that at the beginning. So are we allowed to make alterations, changes, or additions to rubric if we find something that's missing?
Yes, so my request would be that we're just going through this tonight. I think we're scheduled to meet again next Monday or Tuesday, so that if you have some suggestions, that you send those on to Claire, Jeff, or Mike, and then they'll bring them to the table. We will, as a group, talk about it and finalize what the rubric will, or what the questions will be as part of that process. But definitely, you'll have about a week to provide some feedback.
Commissioner Carey?
So my understanding is that we look at this and we evaluate the performance of the superintendent based on this rubric and the content of the rubric as defined.
That is that part of the process, and then there's also the executive limitations monitoring reports that will come into play.
What about a suggestion? Do you suggest that we work individually on this at first, together as a group, or maybe as teams of 2 or 3?
Thank you for that clarifying question. So the process that I recommend is that individuals complete the survey. It's an anonymous activity, and that all results then go to the committee and the superintendent, and they discuss sort of what they're seeing in terms of patterns. I think it's, as I said, it's okay to say, I don't know, or I don't feel like I have enough information. I think when we talked last week, we really talked about this evaluation establishing a baseline because this board has not done this work before. And so it's really about ensuring that folks around this table are really clear about what the expectations are of a superintendent, what highly effective performance looks like, and to the extent, so it's really an opportunity for, I think, learning on all sides, and to really establish areas where, wow, there were a lot of board members that did not know, did not have enough information to respond to this question. How can we design a process to make sure next year that's not the case? I think that's better than working in pairs or teams. The process is really your experience as a commissioner, and with this clarity in terms of what highly effective versus ineffective looks like. It's really your opportunity to reflect on your own observations, and then these guys will try to discern patterns from there.
Thank you.
Commissioner Waltz?
I think it'd be helpful, with his reporting, there's evidence stating, what things he has already accomplished that are in support of the different.
The monitoring
goals.
report.
So, the monitoring report. So how do I get access to those to kind of look for examples that is this thing, is development, is, So should we be, I imagine we should be doing that.
Yes, so they're online.
Examples.
Yeah.
And they're online on the board docs? Or
Yes,
on
the monitoring reports are on the BSD website, all of them that have been submitted to the board.
Okay, not board docs, just BSD.
No, maybe Bonnie can clarify where the monitoring reports are.
They're on the website. At some point, I'll learn how to do the policies and monitoring reports, everything on board docs, but as of right now, it's on the website.
Can you send us a link?
It's on the website.
Okay.
Yeah, we can send you a link, absolutely.
The drop-down menu,
link.
yeah. Russ is saying, yeah, he
We'll
can
send
do
you
that. Thank you, good
Just-
question.
Can I just clarify? I think you're probably, if I understand your question, you're probably asking for more than just the monitoring reports, right? Because you're looking at these competencies, you want to know, how do I evaluate that? What evidence do I look at? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I want something to jar my memory, essentially.
Great,
Very important.
that is. Okay, Commissioner Fisher?
Thank you. The only question that stuck out at me, because I've been looking at this, you mentioned that the survey goes to the superintendent's direct reports.
Mm-hmm.
So the superintendent is accountable for the whole performance of the district.
Mm-hmm.
Why only the super's direct reports?
That's a good question. I think the first time around, it's difficult, before the board has gotten clear about what the role of the superintendent is and what the work of the superintendent is. It's difficult to involve lots of layers of the organization. And so arguably direct reports have the most direct knowledge of superintendent performance in all of these areas, maybe not every area, but most areas. Once you start to get into other levels of the organization, direct knowledge and direct experience with the work of the superintendent is more limited. And so I believe a better process is for the board to get really clear about its expectations and the performance of the superintendent, set some goals, and then identify in future years we didn't feel like we had enough information in this particular area, or we want to now survey teachers or other stakeholder groups in the area of instructional leadership or in the area of community relations, rather than put a survey out with these 6 domain areas, some of which people do not have direct experience with. I think is a bit much to ask for a process that you haven't undertaken before. I think it's...
So are we evaluating the superintendent's performance or the results that have happened because of his performance, or both?
So ideally, you will be articulating goals for student performance also as part of this process, or you already have articulated goals for student performance. I'm not clear where you're at as a district, but I think best practice suggests that including as part of the superintendent's evaluation, in addition to these areas of work that you have to be able to do in order to perform your job as a superintendent, and it's rare that it happens the first time around, but that you establish goals for student learning, in addition to, if there's an area of performance that emerges as being one that is in need of improvement, you can establish a goal in that area as well. So it really depends on sort of what you get back this first round. I think first and foremost, the board needs to be on the same page in terms of how it understands the job of the superintendent and how it believes the superintendent is performing, and then start to link the results of that to district performance overall.
Right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Alwell. How's it? Yep. Commissioner Sowers?
Do you know about these ahead of time? Is this the
I've
first
seen
time?
this document.
Okay, so this is not new. Okay. And I'm assuming as a new board member, I will not be reviewing it.
Commissioner?
I think it's, well, I would say that I think it's appropriate to consider at least, maybe not completing the survey, but going through it, and so, because it is an educational process in terms of establishing expectations. Great.
Commissioner Pillsbury?
I have two questions. The first one, is this on? That's my third question. Okay. I spent a considerable amount of time a couple weeks ago when we were requested to send in our evaluation. What's going to happen with that information? You gave us a very significant amount of paper work.
Yes, Commissioner Wick will answer.
Okay. Yes, Keith, Commissioner Pillsbury. So I think what you're asking about is, as we all know, the contract calls for one or more formative feedback opportunities in addition to the official summative evaluation. Nicole's helping us with the summative evaluation. We all did some work, substantial work, frankly, just a couple of months ago, 1 to 2 months ago, maybe less, you have to correct me on my dates, on the formative piece. And in a perfect world, we would have started this formative piece several months earlier, so it wouldn't be so tightly bumping up against the summative piece. So I think we as a board do want to think about what do we do with the formative work we've done, which is sort of put on hold, because I think rightly so, when we engaged Nicole to help us with the summative piece, she suggested, and we agreed, that we put the formative thing temporarily on hold until we figure out and get our sea legs on the summative piece. And now that we're doing that, we're bumping so close up to the summative piece that I think there might be a bit of a, I would think of it in two possible ways. One, I think the formative work we did is very helpful, a helpful exercise, almost like a warm-up or a scrimmage, whereas what we're doing with Nicole now is the official game. But again, I'm just speaking as one commissioner, open to ideas. I think I did ask Nicole in her professional expertise what she thought we should do with this almost completed formative work. And I think she agreed, or she stated, and I agreed, it seemed very reasonable, that maybe we consider that as somewhat of a a warm-up, a prime the pump kind of thing. But obviously, this is a board of 12 people, and if others feel very strongly, I just want to say that we as a board, when we've spoken before, engaged the Vermont School Boards Association to assist us, but we still are a board, and this is still our process. And so certainly if there's an objection to the way we've sort of put on hold the formative and maybe kept it on ice and keeping it on ice, let us know. But I actually think I will take a stand here in that, unfortunately, it's just too close to the summative that it creates some dissonance there. Did that answer your question?
Well, okay, we have a format where we have sort of ranking or whatever rating. Will there be a written part to this summative evaluation that could include some of the comments that we have? There was consensus, a lot of consensus on that first piece that we did that I think should be part of the summative evaluation. That's my response to your thing. what you just said.
In other words, I think what you just said is there was important work done, feedback that some commissioners or all believe they put their heart and their mind into, and it seems a shame that it wouldn't somehow translate through. So, but specifically, I think it is my hope, and Nicole can confirm, that in addition to just, rank 1 to 5 effectively is what this is doing with words. Rank 1 to 5, it is my hope that every question will have a box where we can support why we said 1 or 5 or somewhere in between. In other words, the narrative that you want to add to fill in the number.
Great.
Yeah, so, and we can talk about this, and certainly folks should share their feedback and their perspective. I've done it both ways in terms of a comment box after every section, and the feedback I got after doing that was too much, and you sort of lose people, but that certainly after every domain area, so in the area of board and superintendent relationship, for example, there's an opportunity to add comment, and there's no limit on the number of words you can submit, et cetera. So certainly think that the committee will have access to the work that has been done before, and it's in many ways aligned, but I think what we talked about here is the benefit of this rubric is that it's very clear in terms of what effective performance looks like, and so hopefully it won't feel like as Jeff said, that it was an effective use of your time in terms of priming your thinking on each of those areas, and perhaps this process will help even get clearer about your responses or your feedback in these areas.
Thank you. Superintendent O'Bang.
First, maybe mine's not working either. Testing. Oh, there we go. Let me thank Nicole for taking the time to come and work with us. Much appreciated, and we'll do our best to follow your guidance as we move down. I do want to sort of just raise one, since it was brought up in terms of the formative piece in my contract, just for the record, that I did have a lot of questions around what we were doing with that, the process and the timing of that. And just to clarify that we are talking about the superintendent process, not about my evaluation. We're not in an executive session, so I know the conversation was starting to go down evaluation and that piece. So with that said, Nicole, a couple of questions that I have that I hope that you can help us with. One is that the main thing is around the clarification around some of these areas in terms of what's the domain of the board and what's the domain of the superintendent, right? I look at the section even around policies, right? And really policies are the domain of the board, but there's a whole section around the work of superintendent doing with policies, right? So I think there's some pieces there that needs to be talked about in terms of even the maintenance of it. Is that, there's in the rubric kind of talks about, the maintenance of it, the superintendent's responsibility in terms of how to do it. And we've got a committee that actually does that work and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's some areas that we have to kind of talk about and figure out if that's the board's or is it mine, because that would be nice to know clearly. Also, I think defining what some of these areas actually mean, 'cause I'm not sure if everyone has the same understanding when you get to some of the categories and even some of the definitions. I'll give you an example here that it just jumped out at me under community relations. There's under the rubric, one of the developing areas, it says, is visible at a distance. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. I don't know if anybody in the room would know.
Bigger than a foot tall.
Yeah, if you can see him from afar, then that's good. I don't know. So those are some things I think we probably need to kind of really clarify exactly what it means, because if I was doing the evaluation, I wouldn't know what to do with that in terms of. But so I'm sure we'll get into that. So those are some questions that I hope you can think about as you work with us around doing that work, right?
As I said, this gets better every time we do it. So, and I have no doubt that this will be a very engaged group to help clarify those areas.
So Commissioner Wick, you had one final?
Yeah, Superintendent O'Bang, were you finished? Because okay. So, yeah, I just want to emphasize to everyone, and I'm sure Nicole has said it, but this is one of the most important things, the work of the board, one of the most important things the board does. And so I think it's important that we together as a board take the time to hear from Nicole and or those who have sort of preliminarily shape this, but I also want to say that we're a board of 12 elected members, and I see our role, the three of us sitting here, more as just facilitators and leading it. So I guess what I'm getting at is now is very important to hear feedback from you between now and next week, because we're running up against, I wouldn't say deadlines, I think we're still in good shape, but I would ask every one of you to look carefully at this, to provide additional thoughts to Claire and myself and Mike, so that we have the best framework possible that we can then survey out. And so the other thing I want to mention, and it's kind of a question for Nicole, but it's also for all of us, is the results. Nicole mentioned something about the committee looking at it with the superintendent. I'm actually thinking that it would be more appropriate, given we are a board of equals, that the entire group together gets to look at it, comment on it, think about it, and of course, I want to make this as fair as possible for every board member, so that it doesn't feel like, a small subgroup of the board is controlling the process. I'm trying to figure out how we do that. Do you have any thoughts? Is it okay? You had mentioned a committee gets the results, but I think maybe we'd have you back in, and we would talk about the results and trends as a group, and everyone would have a chance to hear that and see that. What do you think?
I think I've done it, as I said, a number of different ways. I think it can become challenging to have a very in-depth evaluation conversation with 12 or 13, 14, including me, people. And so I think we could possibly think about an approach that had a smaller group reviewing the results, talking about some trends, and sort of starting to identify some themes and patterns. And then what I'm hearing is you want the full board to be able to see the full results. Obviously, all that would happen in executive session. I'm very careful with materials that get developed here, and so I would need to bring paper copies, distribute them, and then collect them. Everything gets shredded. So I think we can talk about that. I think that's an area for folks to give feedback to you over the next week, in terms of, should it be a full board discussion with 14 to do the evaluation itself, or is the board comfortable with 5 of us in a room really talking through some of the results, which can take, just with a small group, several hours, and then reporting back to the board both the summative and the raw results, so that people don't feel like they don't know what anybody else said and need to just trust a small group. So I would welcome, in addition to feedback on the rubric, some thoughts about that process to share with Jeff and Claire. And Mike, I think there's trade-offs.
Superintendent O'Bang?
I did have one other thing I wanted you to think about, Nicole. The competency areas, and then on the screen there, you've got the goal areas, right? So the board has to spend some time identifying goals as well, right? So the competencies are separate from the goals, and then they identify if there's 3, 4, or 5. I think 5 is too much. Research says 3.
Yep.
But, and then the board identifies those goals and the targets around that.
Correct.
So that's another task that the board has to do as well.
Correct. And so my understanding is the board hadn't necessarily done that for this past year, and so we would not include goals in this evaluation, but that the process itself would culminate in the identification.
But we could start now preparing, well, actually it's not we, the board, could start now looking at what goals they want to set, and then be able to have that in place for the coming year. Right.
Correct.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you
very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Commissioners. Commissioner Carey?
Just a question about the format of the feedback that you're looking for from us individuals.
An email?
Emails?
Email.
There's a lot of information here. You want?
Let me supplement that. By any means you wish to transmit, including call, meet, whatever works. In other words, we really, I'm sure I'm speaking for all of us, we want the best framework possible, and all your minds are important. So I'm willing to meet. I know I suspect we're all willing to get together, do some work on this.
Did you have a timeline when it needs to be?
Yes, I believe we're meeting again with Nicole, Claire, Mike, and myself, and next week.
Yep, let me just
Nicole will check
confirm
that.
the date.
Did we firm that up?
I think we had some suggested dates, but
No,
we
it's
had.
actually the 15th.
The
So you
15th.
have 2 weeks.
Okay, 2 weeks, good, we got a little more time.
Yes, April 15th. So I would suggest if you could get feedback to you all by the 12th, then.
Yeah.
Great.
Seems reasonable. You have a
Yes,
weekend.
so by the 12th. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nicole.
You're welcome.
For your
Thank you.
presentation. Thank you. Thank you. All right, next on the agenda is Interim Principal Green. Welcome. Sit up.
Up here, come on up, come on up.
Thank you very much for having me
Welcome.
at the table.
Thank you.
This will be brief because I think we had an agreement that we'd probably recess to
Yes.
executive session. So I just wanted to first start by reading something to you. This was an email that I received on March 24th, 2010. And it is a message from the Burlington Public Schools. Dear Noel, thank you for your interest in the Burlington schools. I write to let you know that we have not selected you for an interview, as your experiences do not match our needs at this time. I wish you the best in your search and truly appreciate your application. With best regards. So I actually tried to come to this district a long time ago. And at that time, I had had 4 years of administrative experience. But as you can see, I didn't get even an interview. I just got a form email. So what I saw when I arrived here 6 years later was a lot of progress. I was persistent because I wanted to get back to the East Coast, and I stayed interested in this district. I moved from California to be here. I found, again, this posted as an assistant principal job. 3 years ago, I applied. I was invited to come to the district. I loved what I saw, and I stayed. And I just want to say that I'm committed to the district. I want to stay here. I want to be part of this building process to improve Burlington High School. There's so much potential here. Great faculty, great staff, great students, and obviously a very interested community. So I just wanted to reaffirm my commitment to this school, to this position, and to this district, and I look forward to our conversation in the executive session.
Great, thank you. So with that, can I have a motion to move to executive session? Commissioner Fisher, I have it right here.
So I move to enter executive session under 1 VSA 313AE to discuss personnel matters. Do we have specifically what personnel matter? Because I believe that we should be mentioning that.
There are two, yeah.
Okay.
It's.
So it is.
Yep.
So to move into executive session under 1 VSA 313E to discuss BHS principal hiring and Flynn principal hiring.
Yeah. Thank you. Do you have a second?
I'll second that.
First was, do we have
Me.
a first Commissioner Fisher and a second Commissioner Wick? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any abstentions? Oh my gosh.
Any opposed?
Any opposed, excuse me, any abstentions? All right, the motion carries. We will move into executive session.
Oh, I see. Okay, I guess.
I would like to make the motion that the board moves that the superintendent is encouraged to offer a 2-year interim principalship to Noel Green, and the board goes on record that should the offer be accepted, the board will approve it.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Carey, all those in favor?
I think
Aye.
Discussion. I think we've discussed it in
No, but
executive
still,
session. Any discussion? Okay, Excuse me. All those in favor?
Can I call for a roll call, please?
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. We'll do a roll call on the motion. Commissioner Gorman?
I would like to say just out front that I still maintain that the board should have offered him the full position, but in the interest of peace and progress, aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Ivanchich?
Aye. Yes.
Commissioner Gulick? Aye. Commissioner Carey?
Yes, aye.
Commissioner Waltz?
Aye.
Commissioner Fisher?
I would have preferred a full-time position, but in the spirit of compromise, I vote yes.
Commissioner Wick?
Yes.
Commissioner Alwell?
Yes.
Commissioner Sowers? Yes. Commissioner Pillsbury?
Aye.
Thank you. So the motion passes. Thank you, everyone.
I move to re-enter executive session under the appropriate Vermont statute to discuss Flynn principal hiring.
Thank you. Commissioner Fisher?
Second?
Second? Commissioner, sorry, Superintendent O'Bank?
Just a quick comment. I wanted to thank the board for taking the opportunity to reconsider and very thoughtful in terms of giving some clear direction going forward to support Burlington High School. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent O'Bank.
I second the motion.
Second, Commissioner Gulick. Thank you. We'll move into executive session. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Thank you. We're back in session.
Thursday, right?
She needs a.
Yep.
Oh, she is.
I'd like to make a motion
Go to 26.
that the board approve the recommendation by Superintendent Obeng to hire LaShawn Whitmer-Sells as principal of Flynn Elementary.
Do I have a second? Commissioner Alwell? Any discussion? Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention?
I abstain.
Commissioner Fisher abstains. Okay, the motion is approved. Thank you. The next order of business is a motion, actually, yes, a motion by Commissioner Fisher.
So as per discussion in executive session around the hiring of the Burlington High School Director of Guidance, the superintendent has asked for some flexibility in the hiring process. So we did not agree on final language, so I am going to propose the language the board moves to ask the superintendent to proceed with the hiring process for the Burlington High School Director of Guidance as laid out in current board policies with the exception of public forums.
Do I have a second?
Are we discussing the language?
I need a second before the motion.
Oh,
Commissioner
yes.
Carey?
Second, yes.
Okay. Any discussion? Yep.
Can we
Any
start
discussion?
with Superintendent Obeng?
Yes.
Superintendent.
I'm just reading, I'm just trying to see if it's more simpler for you to look at section B that would cover. So, I'll just rereading it just to ensure.
See that policy? No? Last I knew it wasn't.
He's waiting on you.
It wasn't?
Yeah.
Oh, you know
You're-
where it
you're
is?
waiting on me?
It's in an email.
Who's waiting on who?
With the exception of section B, would that
No.
cover?
No, I don't think so, because the wording in there that I think I like, it says, such systems and procedures shall not fail to include a detailed and authentic stakeholder engagement process, which engagement process shall be appropriate with respect to the type of employee to be hired. I think it should be a detailed and authentic stakeholder engagement process. I think that's what we discussed.
But not through public forum.
Right, so I'm saying everything in here would be followed in A, B, C, D, except we give you specific flexibility to not have public forums. Is there any other way that you're looking to have flexibility?
It's difficult because I do want to confer with the committee that's going to develop the process, and it's kind of hard to, I want to give them as much flexibility as possible to do a robust process, but at the same time expedite it. So I'm just trying to figure out how I can do that tonight so we can start tomorrow without putting in too many restrictions on them in meeting those goals.
Commissioner Gulak?
I just want to say that I hear what you're saying, Superintendent Obeng, but given our recent past, I believe that a thorough process is very important. And as much as it might be better and easier to expedite in some ways, I think we need to adhere to a pretty stringent set of guidelines.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's not going to happen.
Okay, well.
What I'm saying is I want to be able to give them the flexibility to develop a process. I mean, my direction will still be to them to definitely meet the spirit of the policy as is laid out, and some of the areas that the board has expressed around their needs in terms of candidates coming forward. So I would definitely share that and say that needs to be incorporated. I just not predisposing how they're going to do that, the how piece, right? So they may come up with some creative different ways. I'm not sure how they'll go about that. So I just want to be able to get them that charge and say, develop something and then let us know within these parameters.
I think, as chair, I think we'll offer the Superintendent Obeng to speak to the BHS principal and guidance director. And over the next 3 days, we have a school board meeting next Tuesday, and that you present to the process that you'd like to work with them on to be able to, within our guidelines and our policy, and we'll, giving you the latitude this week to move forward and posting of the position, and then we'll look at that.
Yeah, the position will be posted tomorrow, correct?
We're gonna do that tonight and get it posted tomorrow.
Okay. So yes. Okay.
So are you amenable to that strategy?
Coming up with the process that
Yeah, I would. Could we do it this way? If the board is providing me some flexibility, I will endeavor to push the committee to develop their process and then share the outline with the process with the board in terms of any additional pieces you want before they fully implement.
I think that would work better for us to react to something, because I think I'm uncomfortable with giving a blanket, you have flexibility to not follow the policy without knowing. Like, I think our job is to put the guidelines on the barriers, right? So if you're comfortable with that, coming with a proposal, I think we're comfortable reacting to that.
Yep. And I would say that the goals would be to try to truncate the timeline so we can get as many available candidates out there. At the same time, have a process that'll engage experienced candidates that would be interested in doing it in a short period of time and go for it. That would be the two major goals, to develop a process that meets those needs.
Commissioner Wick?
Yeah. If the superintendent is looking for what I think he's looking for, which is something a process that is fast enough to meet the needs of the marketplace right now, the timing, and one that will satisfy the board based on its policies. I mean, I think we have mutually agreeable goals here. We're all on the same page. I would feel more comfortable if you want to ask us to take away some of the pieces of the policy, to please, by all means, I would suggest, just speaking for myself, post the policy, post the hiring, because I think you said you could post a job posting, and then come back to us if that's what you want to do, with some exceptions, or if you're looking for our advance blessing, so to speak, then come back to us with something. And the board, I think we're on the same page. We
Okay.
all want the same thing here.
Yep, okay. So I'll take the motion as is at this point then and follow with those actions in terms of providing the board with a detailed sort of analysis of what the process will look like. And the board can weigh in at that point as we move forward.
So am I withdrawing my motion?
And we said keep the motion as is, and he will come back.
And we're not going to vote? We just table the motion?
No, we'll.
No, go, I do want the exception, but I will also come back to the board.
You can ask us for more.
And give you the outline and see if there's anything there that, that the board wants to institute, right? Or.
Okay.
All right, so all those in favor of the motion?
So I'm going to read.
Hold on.
You want me to
What
reread
is the
it?
motion?
Or is there more discussion?
I have one more discussion.
Commissioner Wick?
Yeah. So just so I understand it, you're specifically asking us to not do public, or sorry, it's late. You're saying, listen, I do want you to make a motion on allowing me not to do public fora or public forums in this particular hiring. That's what you want tonight because you think it would help expedite the process?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I know that takes considerable time for the planning and the logistics of it, which will elongate the process. I don't want to circumvent that opportunity for the committee to get that piece of evidence. So as I'm saying, tomorrow when I sort of give them the charge, I'm hoping they can come up with something quickly, and they may say, you know what, we need to do a forum because we feel that's what we really need to do. But I just don't want to restrict them out of the gate. I want them to come to me and say, we need to take maybe this piece out so we can get to this, and then I could come back and say, this is what the committee is suggesting, and it still meets the expectations of the board, and then be able to get that support around that.
That's why I think the motion is premature, to prematurely second guess what this committee is going to want to do. So I wouldn't want to tie their hands in any way.
Can we use the word optional?
Yeah, they could still include it though, right?
Commissioner Sowers?
Can we just have you, but can they by Tuesday come to the board with their recommended process?
Yeah, we can do whatever the board wishes.
How does that?
The process begins. You're beginning the process tomorrow.
Well, I'm going to post the process tomorrow. We may not be able to begin the process because depending on what's going to be in the process, right? So if the process is, okay, we have to go and meet with all staff before we develop the questions or something like that, right? Then they might have to start tomorrow. But if they decide as a committee they can develop their own questions, then that takes some time out of the process. So I pretty much what I really wanted was assurances from the board that I could give this group the charge and have them use their lens in terms of what is appropriate to put in the process and what's not appropriate to meet the goals that we both want, right? Without having to say, you have to follow this all the way through, because I know if we do that, we're going to be down the timeline pretty far.
Commissioner Fisher?
I hear what you're saying, but I don't feel comfortable as a board member giving them latitude to not follow any part of the hiring process that they feel that they want to not do. So I would feel comfortable with you coming back on Tuesday to say, here are the things that the team wants an exception for.
Okay.
They don't have to do anything in a week. They just have to ask us what they are not going to do.
I agree, and in the meantime, it's on School Spring. People are applying, maybe they're even looking at CVs. I mean, let's continue working on this while the process is being developed.
So I'm going to withdraw my motion.
Okay. Okay.
Point of clarification, I'd like to ask the superintendent if he feels he can still post the, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he just said he would.
But I don't know. He withdrew the motion. Can you still post tomorrow?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Ward.
And I'll be good.
Okay, Commissioner Pillsbury?
Are we going to, is a motion appropriate now for the superintendent bonus performance? Is it
Thank you, Commissioner
appropriate?
Pillsbury.
I'd like to move.
Yes.
Do I need to read it? Everybody has it in
Everyone
front
has
of them?
had it, and everyone,
And
I'm hoping,
we
has
worked
reviewed
on
it.
this at our last meeting. I'd like to move it forward.
Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner.
I'm done.
Okay,
I just
so a
moved it.
second. Commissioner Gorman, thank you. So all those in favor, any discussion? The superintendent bonus performance goal as presented on board docs. As such, I will forego the reading. All those in favor of supporting the superintendent bonus performance goals for 2019 and 2019 to 2020?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you, Commissioner Pillsbury. And I have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Commissioner Fisher, thank you. Second, Commissioner Carey. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? Thank you very much, Commissioners.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Sowers.